You will never be able to comprehend everything, the seas of love, the intimate and exclusive relationships, and the likeness that exists between creator and creature. In what follows, Jesus addresses Luisa and us. Jesus knows well that we are almost entirely ignorant of the greatness of our souls. We ignore the beauty and divine gifts contained within our souls and how they surpass in beauty, power, and light the rest of creation, to such a point that, as he has said before, we can truly be called little gods, little worlds or universes that contain everything within ourselves. And he repeats, if only they knew how important is the knowledge of ourselves and the knowledge of God. If we clearly understood the beauty of our souls, as the Church and so many saints as Saint Catherine of Siena reminds us, how much esteem we would have for them, how carefully we would avoid staining them by even slightly. For the soul is an immense beauty, a wondrous prodigy, and above all, a work of creative power. After saying this, Jesus adds that since creatures are almost blind in the knowledge of themselves, and even more blind in the knowledge of God, this blindness leads them to defile themselves with 1,000 impurities, to the point of almost completely disfiguring the work of the Creator, so that it is difficult to recognize it as His. It is not hard to see this painful reality in the world we live in today. Not only are we ignorant of all this, but we even strive to erase from our hearts and from the hearts of all human beings every trace of this greatness and dignity we have received. The agenda of today's powerful openly seeks to reset everything, eliminating from humanity its identity as man and woman, gender ideology, destroying the family, fatherhood, and motherhood, the identity and sovereignty of each people and nation to form one single world government and economy, to make one ecumenical religion, emptied of grace and of any bond with the one and true God, to destroy the one and the true church born from the side of Christ and his real presence in the Eucharist, to erase from the heart of man the Redeemer and the purpose for which we were created. And now, openly and shamelessly, there is a plan in motion to erase even our genetic identity created by God, mixing the human genome with artificial biological alterations until we become patented products, property of the great technological corporations, in the hands of the elite who rule the world today. Adam and Eve, after original sin, which emptieth and stripped them of the gifts of and dignity God had given them, heard his footsteps and hid from his sight, for they saw themselves naked. They had lost the royal garment with which God had clothed them, the gift of God Himself. Naturally, they were afraid, and God spoke those tremendous words. Where are you? Book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 9. He says them to use as well, to us as well. Where are you? This disfigurement of his masterpiece, so loved by him and belonging to him, for we are his, cannot leave God indifferent. We are His work, made in His image, destined to be one with Him and to have eternal life. The loss of a single soul is graver than all the evil and suffering endured by all creatures together throughout human history. Then Jesus turns to Luisa and invites her to reflect on their sorrow of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. For he does not see things as we see them, much less as blindly as we do. He sees everything as it truly is in the light of truth, and he asks her something. Jesus calls Luisa to come into his will together with him, to make reparation before the throne of the eternal for our brothers and sisters, for all the acts we should have done, having been created as prodigies of love of his omnipotence, and yet we have been so ungrateful. And of course, also for ourselves, for all the acts we should have done as creatures created by him. And Luisa recounts what happens when he invites her to enter into the divine will with him. In an instant, they found themselves before the Supreme Majesty, and in the name of all, they offered love, thanksgiving, and adoration for having created us with such love, for having endowed us with such immense and beautiful qualities. Let us repeat with Luisa, united with Jesus and our Mother the Virgin, before the Supreme Majesty, this holy task. Mary, can you read the
Mary Guzman
Mary Guzman,
for the second
chapter?
reading. Thank you. We can't hear you, Mary. You don't have an internet? I will read it, Father. Volume 4, July 23rd, 1901. Jesus speaks about his will and about charity. As I was with many doubts about my state, on coming, my adorable Jesus told me, "Daughter, do not fear. What I recommend to you is that you remain always conformed to my will, because when the divine will is in the soul, neither the diabolical nor the human will have the strength to enter the soul to make fun of her." After this, I seemed to see him crucified. And since the Lord had shared with me not only his pains, but some sufferings of another person, he's added, "This is true charity, to destroy oneself in order to give life to others, to take upon oneself the evils of others, and to give me one's own goods."
Thank you, Mother. This chapter from Volume 4, July 23, 1901, Luisa starts sometimes in her writings expresses that she has doubts about her own state. Doubts always generate a certain anxiety, lack of peace, and discomfort, because when the will is in this condition, our human will, without sufficient light, it becomes paralyzed and incapable of acting. This is why then Jesus intervenes. What Jesus recommends to Luisa and to us is that we always remain united and conform to his will. This conformity prevents the snares of the devil or of our human will from entering into us. For the divine will and the diabolical or human will cannot coexist at the same time, just as light and darkness cannot exist together. Shortly after this, Luisa sees Jesus crucified, and he shares with her his sorrows and some of the sufferings of another person. Then he spoke to her about charity. These final words of Jesus about charity in this chapter are a summary of what true charity toward one's neighbor and towards God really is. That is expressed in 3 points. The first, to destroy oneself in order to give life to others. That is, to deny oneself, to practice self mortification. The second, to make the sufferings of one's neighbors one's own. And the third, to give God's one's own goods, that is, to offer Him everything that belongs to us, because all the goods we possess have been given to us by Him. True charity recognizes that these 3 points are the truth and moves us to deny ourselves, to identify ourselves with our neighbor's afflictions, and to restore to God everything He has given us. Charity assures us that He will never allow Himself to be outdone in generosity. We know that charity is like the crown and the center of all the other virtues. This is why in the gifts that we receive through baptism, the 3 theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, charity is the crown. And in the life of the church, this charity is the highest point towards everything, all the law of the church and all the work of the church is to achieve this treasure, this immense gift that is God's love. For us, charity. And then we ask through the intercession of our Blessed Mother, and today that we celebrate St. Luke, the evangelist, through him, this gift of charity for our souls and for all the human beings, all our brothers and sisters. Mary, our mother.
Caro Morel, please, can you read the next one? Mary doesn't have internet, Padre.
Okay.
Okay, January 2nd, 1919. Just as in Jesus, everything must be silent in souls. This morning, my always lovable Jesus made himself seen under a storm of blows. And with his sweet gaze, he looked at me, asking me for help and refuge. I flung myself toward Jesus to rescue him from those blows and enclose him in my heart. And Jesus told me, my daughter, my humanity, under the blows of the scourges, was silent. And not only was my mouth silent, but everything was silent in me. Esteem, glory, power, honor were silent. But in a mute language and eloquently spoke my patience, the humiliation, my wounds, my blood, the annihilation of my being, almost to dust. And my ardent love for the salvation of souls placed an echo on all my pains. Here, my daughter, is the true portrait of loving souls. Everything must be silent in them and around them. Esteem, glory, pleasures, honors, greatness, will, creatures. And if she had these, she must be as though deaf, and as if she did not see anything. On the other hand, my patience, my glory, my esteem, my pains must take over within her, and everything she does, thinks, loves, will be nothing other than love, which will have one single echo with mine, and will ask me for souls. My love for souls is great, as I want all to be saved. Therefore, I go in search for souls who love me, and who, taken by the same follies of my love, would suffer and ask me for souls. But alas, how scarce is the number of those who listen to me.
Thank you, Carol. Well, this chapter of volume 12, January 2nd, 1919, the title that is written in the index of this volume 12 at the end is "In the Passion, all was silent about Jesus." These differences that exist in the text that we can have today, at the end, when we will have the official version of the writings, all these little differences will be corrected. The manuscripts are written with these words, in this case by example. In the Passion, all was silent about Jesus. This chapter begins with a sorrowful scene. Jesus, under a storm of scourging blows, look at Luisa with his gentle gaze and ask her for help and refuge. It is not the first time. When she was 13 years old in 1878, she heard him say to her, "Soul, help me." On that occasion, Luisa had a vision when she stepped out onto the balcony of her house. She saw Jesus carrying the cross to Calvary, and as he passed in front of her house, he turned to look at her and said those words. Words that would echo in her soul for the rest of her life. Jesus, every day until the end of the world, remains under this storm of blows that all or almost all of his creatures give him. All of this is always in act, and in act too is his plea for help and refuge. Therefore, we can always offer him our help and our hearts as his refuge. On this occasion, Luisa immediately intervenes to free him from those blows and to enclose him within her heart. Then Jesus tells Luisa what he was doing in the midst of that storm. His humanity under the scourging blows remained silent. Not only his mouth, but his whole interior, everything in him was silent. His self-esteem, his glory, his power, his honor. At the same time, however, his patience, his humility, his wounds, and his blood spoke eloquently. All this abyss of sorrows and humiliations had as its most profound source the voluntary annihilation of his entire being, almost to dust, and his burning love for the salvation of souls. The waters flowing from this purest fountain echoed through all his pains. Jesus concludes his teaching by telling us something very deep and important that we must imitate. If in Jesus, who is our head and our king, everything was silent, so it should be in us. Everything must be silent within us and around us. This is what the Holy Gospel teaches. Must be silent self-esteem, self-glory, pleasures, honors, greatness. Our own will must also die. Creatures, and if there are any, the souls must be as if deaf, as if it saw nothing. As St. Paul says, we must regard them as though we did not have them. And in their place must enter the virtues of Jesus, his patience, his glory, his esteem, his sufferings. If we do as he tells us, then everything we do, everything we think, everything we love will be transformed into love, a love that will have an echo only with that of Jesus and will beg him for souls. Jesus ends by saying that his love for souls is immense because he wants all to be saved. For this reason, he seeks souls who love him and who, sharing in the same madness of his love, or follies of his love, suffer and ask him for souls. But alas, how scarce is the number of those who listen to me, says Jesus. This is that Jesus has told us is what constitutes a true and holy Christian life. If we lack this, we are still far from true holiness and from true love. About this chapter, we suggested in other occasions to people and to those that coordinate the groups before the meetings, before the encounters, the weekly encounters, to transform these chapters like in questions and answers. And I want to share with you, with this chapter, an example of this that can help us and those that share with us in these encounters to find the truths, the values, the effects of all these chapters that are contained in them. By example, and I will follow through the whole chapter with questions and answers. What scene does Luisa contemplate? The scourged Jesus who looks at her. What does Jesus say to her with his gaze? He asks her for help and refuge. How does Luisa respond to what Jesus is suffering and to what he asks of her? Luisa throws herself toward him to free him from the blows and encloses him in her heart. What teaching does Jesus give us while he is being scourged? First, that all his humanity was silent, the silence of his humanity. Second, which aspects of his humanity were silent? His mouth, his self-esteem, his glory, his power, his honor. Third, while everything in him was silent, what spoke eloquently in him? His patience, his humility, his wounds, his blood. Or what deeper realities within him echoed all his sorrows, the annihilation of his very being, and his burning love for the salvation of souls. 5. Contemplating how Jesus lived his scourging, what does he want those who love him to do? That everything in us may fall silent. 6. What must be silent within us? Self-esteem, glory, pleasures, honor, greatness, our own will, and creatures. And if by chance, the seventh, we still have some of these attachments, what should we do with them? The answer, we must be as though deaf to them and as if we saw nothing. 8th point. With what should we replace all of this? We must put in their place the patience, the glory, the esteem, and the sorrows of Jesus. The 9th point. Into what will our actions, thoughts, and loves then be transformed? Into love that will echo only that of Jesus and will beg him for souls. And the 10th point, the conclusion. What is Jesus' final lament? But alas, how scarce is the number of those who listen to me. Mother, I conclude the commentary on these chapters.
Phyllis, would you like to do do you like to do the closing prayers, please? Thank you. Unmute your microphone.